it's not necessarily the heat. I mean, we've got kind of decent cloud coverage today. It's very clear, though. There are some clouds, but it's not really providing a lot of shade. But it's really humid out here. I think it was like 94 or something today. Whenever I was looking at it. But anyway, welcome to another episode of Ride&Rant. I am your host. Riddle me this. What happens when companies replace all of their workers, but at the same time, they also seem to forget that the same people they just got rid of are the same ones that they're going to be relying on, essentially, to buy their products as the consumer. With many corporations, a long-time obsession with, it's like automation and working so diligently to remove humans from the equation. And this is not the first time that something like this has been attempted. It's very quickly, once again, made the idea of a human worker and a human consumer very much obsolete. Even though a lot of these CEOs and stockholders and investors don't really seem to be bothered by the obvious consequences of their short-term thought process. What we're seeing is, kind of like the illusion or the delusion of progress on a lot of the part of these companies. For years it's been kind of a love-hate relationship to corporations and those that run them and make the most profit from them have had where humans are concerned. Whether we're talking about, PTO, giving away free money, whenever they're not even doing their work, or, sick days. Don't they know I show up when I'm nearly dead? Shouldn't they be the same way? Or even like personal days. Heaven forbid anyone have a life with demands outside of their designated work schedule. So many of these, I would honestly say, corporate elitists at this point. So many of them have this, kind of utopian mindset, this technological utopian mindset where, despite all the amazing ideas and breakthroughs and advancements that everyday humans have made with their God-given talents, and that's another big thing in these various industries, especially entertainment, where there's design and artistic accomplishments, or even mathematics fields. All of these various areas, people have made such drastic impacts to just the human living conditions and just the comfort of existence in life anymore. It's still not good enough for them because they don't have the ultimate control. That's essentially what it comes down to. It's amazing how the same people who run all these companies and have the mentality where they can't or they don't, or in most cases they won't take orders from anybody. It's not in their genetic makeup to do so. The demand that they have, that is exactly what they want their workforce to be conditioned to do. It's like no breaks, no complaints, no wages, essentially, at the end of the day. They just want something that is going to work, that they don't have, that expects nothing of them. And it's a very, very thin line between, returning to slavery, where nowadays color would have nothing to do with it, as much as it would the elitist versus the common man. Or even going back to the industrial era, where no one, it's like not even children were exempt from having to work in some of the worst conditions imaginable. Going back to a time whenever, entire families, mothers, fathers, daughters, sons, grandparents, they worked around the clock, 24/7. This is before, the 8-hour a day work schedule was even, thought of or even put into law by, I forgot what president it was at the time. But that had to be passed into law because it had gotten so out of hand that people were actually going on strike against these companies that were just they live to push them to see how much they can take before they break. There might not be nowadays. The, obviously physical brutality currently in the workplace, but I think it's actually increased in its presence and stealth over the years to be just as manipulative as it was before. And while they're obsessed with removing the human element, they're also affecting the consumer element as well, which is what CEOs really do have blinders on. They never admit it, of course, because their narcissism won't even allow it. Part of this I would contribute to the fact that they're only ever focused on the short term. It's never the long term. They think in terms of quarters. What can be accomplished in these 3 months? What devastation can we cause in these 3 months? What kind of havoc can we wreak in these 3 months? They only think on a quarterly basis. It's never long term. And of course, why it's why so many companies are always so chaotic and never seem to have their act together. They never seem to be organized and have a common goal, even though they love to push company goals. I've always had creative positions, design positions, whether it was visual, video, 3D, whatever it was, any of those kind of things. The last position that I had, a lot of our quote-unquote goals were based around how many minutes worth of content we produced within a quarter. Well, do you ever think that if we actually accomplished that goal, that it ever actually stayed there? No. They wanted to push it further. They wanted to see how much further we could go. And of course, what choice do you have in so many of those positions? You really don't have a choice. You either do it or you say, forget it, and I'm not going to. And then you're looking at facing a, what do they call those things? PIP, a performance improvement plan, because you're not adhering to the demands that we're placing on top of you. One thing about the design field is that it is completely subjective. It's like what you design for one person, somebody else may not like it. There is never a way to be able to quantify how much an image that is created for an advertisement is going to provide any kind of monetary return for a company, or especially in these cases, a single department. And I mean, projects are started and they're never finished because they're constantly chasing this phantom of progress that they are never going to catch. They never have before, they're not going to now, and they never will in the future. But they've got that incessant hope. Actually, hope is too healthy of a word for what they've got. It's something even way worse than that. It literally is an addiction to the potential of success. That is what I would say. This is one of the reasons why they act with so much abandon when making decisions. And of course these are decisions that affect people's lives, stability, their livelihood, and ultimately their future. And that's just on a financial level. It's not to mention the emotional or physical and mental toll that we've just, started to recognize in the last several years. The price that all employees end up paying with each new master they slave away for. Without a job, these former employees, don't have income. And without income, they can't really go on to become a consumer. And without consumers, these companies, conglomerates, do not have their subscribers for Netflix. They don't have buyers for their overpriced clothing lines, for their fast food, whose quality has degraded so badly in the last few decades. Not to mention, even what it was like a trend on TikTok. I think it was about maybe a month or so ago, where you had all of these, whenever the tariffs and everything like that was coming up, and then you had all of these Asian companies that were essentially exposing all of these high-end brand names, Gucci, Prada, I think even Nike might have been in there or something like that, but all of these very, very expensive brand names. And the fact that, they pay a fraction to have these things made in some sweatshop in China, yet people are paying thousands of dollars for what they think is quality over here, and it really is not. One of the most obvious, as of late, would be what we're seeing kind of in the fast food industry right now. You could call it the modern canary in the coal mine, just as these early alarm systems would alert underground miners to, dangerous toxic fumes whenever it would kill over, because its smaller system would be affected more drastically early on than that of its human counterparts that could kill them. The fast food industry is kind of alerting the corporations, but it would seem they just rather take their chances. Don't tell us what's going on, just tell us how much money you're making every day or every week or every month or whatever it is. Just tell us at the end of the quarter what it is that you made in profits. Don't tell us about any of the problems. You go into most any, if not all, McDonald's now, and it's really sad to see what to millennials like myself, maybe even Gen Z, what these restaurants from our childhood look like now. Gone are all the bright colors, the characters all throughout the branding on the restaurant. Ronald McDonald and Grimace and the Hamburglar and all of those characters that were really a part of so many people's childhood and their upbringing and everything like that they experienced with their families, and what these restaurants from our childhood look like now is so sad. It's the child-friendly atmosphere has been replaced by monochromatic tones and dull, boring depression gray, like it's something out of District 13 from Pan Am. It's like we're in the Hunger Games now. It's like everything has just lost all of its color altogether. I mean, when's the last time that you actually saw a brightly colored car? I mean, you got red, black, gray, white. Those are about most of your color options nowadays. You walk in into any of these restaurants and you hardly ever see a person actually standing at the counter anymore. And why would you? You look over to the side and they have these brand new shiny kiosks. It'll take your order, it'll take your money, and then you don't have to worry about the pleasantries. Hello, welcome to McDonald's. How are you? Oh, I'm fine, thank you. What can I get for you today? And I know it may not seem like, that big of a deal, but it's those small things, the intricacies of human interaction throughout your day that are really a practice in human connection. And it's not just something that adults benefit from, it's something that children, I think, honestly have lost nowadays. They're used to interacting with something that they just put in a command and it spits back out to them whatever it is that they're supposed to be expecting. But as much as these companies like to tout, we are family, we care about our employees, that's why we give them pizza and donuts. But don't you dare ask or even expect a raise, or all the family events that you miss, all the vacations you're guilted into not taking because we just can't function without you sitting in a desk for 8 hours a day. That is, until we decide your role no longer coincides with the new direction the company is going in. Then you see they put their profits first, because your salary is now added to their revenue that their stockholders see, and they can boast minimizing labor costs because, hey, they'll just dump it on your coworkers after all. But you're supposed to feel grateful because now you're on to your next adventure, or you're starting a new chapter in your life. Woo! You're free at last, free at last. Though it was never on your terms to begin with. They fail to realize that if every industry follows suit, and we've seen it before, because no corporation can think for itself. If it could, they wouldn't all be copying the same actions as their competitors. If they follow suit, who will be left with enough income to even be considered a consumer anymore? Most corporations create luxuries anymore. Most of the time whenever you walk into like a store at Walmart or Target, especially Target, the fancy version of Walmart, it's mostly full of luxuries, the wants that we have as opposed to the needs. The thing that people will buy with the minimum money they will have will be the necessities. And McDonald's, Wendy's, Burger King, those are not necessities. Man. All this talking kind of makes you thirsty after a little while. I really kind of wish that I had like one of those camelback type things. And you can just strap on, put it under the vest, just have a straw like around my helmet. But anyway, it's almost as though we're facing the rise of the robber baron. Again, I've said it previously, the phrase, those who forget their history are doomed to repeat it. What we're seeing now with humans being replaced by a different type of machine, which, yes, I would say AI is just another machine. It's another tool. It's not a solution, to solve all problems. It's very similar to, the robber barons of the 1800s. Just replace, for example, Rockefeller or Carnegie or Vanderbilt and Gould with, Bill Gates and Zuckerberg and Bezos and Cook. Formerly, it would have been Jobs. I can't forget Larry Fink, BlackRock's CEO for sure. He's definitely up there. And of course, JP Morgan never left, because there you have Jamie Dimon keeping that seat warm. They might try to dress more casual, wear mock turtlenecks and, jeans and tennis shoes compared to their, three-piece suit counterparts, but they still think the same. It's the same mindset. It's the same mentality. They still exploit the workers. They still want to crush the competition, usually typically buying them out and then killing off whatever that product or service was, if, and this is a big one, if they've already got one that does the exact same thing. Those people that work for that company, they now have no idea what's going to happen whenever they're taken over, because, are they going to be let go? Are they going to be transferred to something else, doing something that they were not even trained to do in the first place? And of course, we can't forget the corruption that we've seen during most of our lifetimes, where, a lot of these companies, just like back then, they influence government through lobbyists to change laws in order to protect their wealth. And of course, wealth is what they're after. As much as they can possibly acquire. If younger generations listening, wealth is not money. It's not what you carry around in your pocket. It's not what you've got on your debit card. It's not the same as being rich. Wealth is the accumulation of tangible assets like property, land, real estate typically, investments in other companies that they don't even own. The human problem that these companies have faced for decades, they now feel they have a solution, which is to replace it altogether. When they don't have to share their wealth and the liquid assets, which is the money that we all think about whenever we're thinking about these millionaires and billionaires who just have stacks of cash and just throw all over the place, that's not where their actual value is. When they don't have to share their wealth and liquid assets with those who have helped to build and maintain their corporation and that company's image, then what they call progress is really just a little thing called, I think it was called corporate necromancy, which is essentially defined as like endless profit chasing at the expense of their people or their employees, one of the two. But that's essentially what a lot of these companies are doing. They're chasing something that they will never, ever acquire, that they will never catch, that they will never possess themselves. It's an impossibility. So back to the economic paradox. These companies will find them in eventually. Some are already feeling it, though not painfully so yet. They may want endless growth, but in a world that they continually tell us has limited resources, how are they going to achieve that growth with all those pesky humanoids running around, messing up their perfect non-human world? It's still reliant on human inhabitants. They're essentially eliminating the very foundation of their marketing audience. We're not just talking women as consumers or men as consumers or, the elderly or, children. We're talking about all of them. Even the boomers are having to come out of what they thought was going to be their retirement until they died, because the experts were even wrong about how much they needed to invest and set aside. My generation should already know there is no retirement for us. So we'll be working, or at least doing something, till we're dead. And if our existence is, meant to be jobless with no disposable income past what we actually can scrape together for the necessities merely to survive, then where are all their human buyers going to come from? Seriously. We are a consumer nation. Speaking of Netflix earlier, there was a documentary on there called Buy Now. I don't know if they've removed it yet or not, but it was incredibly eye-opening to see how we have actually been conditioned for the sake of these companies' profits to just buy and buy and buy. We've been trained to do so. You have to have the latest and greatest. Combine that with our debt-based economy that has been such since the early founding of this country, since, well, technically after World War II. That's whenever things really started going downhill. The end of the gold standard and everything that came along with that. But these companies only survive when people buy in excess and don't stop. What happens whenever people can't financially consume anymore? If these companies are not expecting AI or their robot workers to buy the goods they're peddling now, who's left? No sales, no business. At the same time, I kind of feel like we're seeing like the writing on the wall. Companies are doing their dead level best to gaslight and tell us to not believe our lying eyes, and we can clearly see they're in fact lying. Anyone who has worked in the corporate world knows that the people companies lie to the most are the very ones who work for them. It would be a liability for that company if they didn't. They continually say, "We're not replacing humans, your jobs are safe." Then these are the same people who will turn around and send out a company-wide email and say, "We've just gone through a painful reconstruction, but don't worry, no one else is getting fired." At the moment, they just forget to add that last part. But as you look at, McDonald's and Walmart now with their drone delivery services, how many Shopify drivers is that going to affect? It may not be the most glamorous job, but at least it's something, and now they're taking that as well. And of course, how long before fast food ends up delivering food by drone? Even now, you can't be sure when you call a business and someone answers if it's actually a real person or AI. Actions speak louder than words, and their actions are at deafening levels right now. I've always been, and I don't know if I would say a student, a fan, I really don't know, but of World War II. Everything that happened during that time, what led up to it, the things that are still being discovered of those atrocities going back 80 years ago. Let's see, 30, 70, 80, 90 years ago. Where the Nazis were looking for the final solution, as they called it, to the Jewish problem. Now, of course, they didn't just focus on Jews, but others that they deemed as deplorable or, inhuman, undesirable, useless. But the Jewish population was the majority of their progressive efforts at the time, given how, far spread they were throughout Central Europe countries and especially Germany. And of course, Germans have always been known for their efficiency. Whenever I was traveling in college, there was no, being a minute or two late for a German train. To be early was to be on time. France, it was more of a suggestion that might work out or not. C'est la vie. But similar to the Third Reich, in so many of their efforts, they focused so much on the dehumanization of those that they saw as useless to society, useless to their progress and productivity for a greater Germany. They couldn't tolerate the inconvenience of humanity. And much like today, the job market has become so dehumanizing. We're forced to interact with machines and automation, automated, this and automated that. A company won't even give people the time of day, but yet expect us to be there the first day that the new iPhone drops or a new tablet is released. You can't even escape the stalking from Facebook and Google now, listening to your conversations when your phone is sitting inches or a few feet beside you, picking up everything that you say. I saw the other day, the iPhone 16s now have eye tracking. It's watching what you look at on your screen. It's not bad enough it gives you ads based on your conversations, but how long before we're in a Black Mirror episode where your phone will not let you perform a function like making a call without your complete and total attention through eye contact with its camera? Even marketing departments, it used to be the human's job to evaluate and try to understand human needs across a demographic. That's mainly what the Mad Men TV series was based on. The advertising men of Madison Avenue and New York City. It was their job to do the market research, to conduct focus groups, to ask the questions of their potential consumer. What they liked about a product, what they didn't like, why they bought it, why they didn't, and form a communicative campaign around that. With, the emergence of AI now with Google's VO3 distracting everybody once again, we're constantly being sold on this idea that it's better to be inhuman for the sake of corporations than it is to be human for the sake of humanity. And not to mention the fact that the quality of most products anymore is abysmally pathetic due to mass production. But if only robots and AI and kiosks are the way of the future, I can only imagine how the cost will skyrocket due to their newly found sustainability needs through planned obsolescence. Then only imagine the nosedive quality is going to take inevitably. But that's a rant for another ride.